I Ola. Ola Jach. Dzień dobry Państwu.
Welcome. I would like to welcome you to the second day of the Congress of New America. We will have another module focusing on sustainable development and aesthetics. I would like to present our guests, Dr. Ania Oswald, Aleksandra Jach, Karsten Wittke, and Dr. Claudia Bittner, PhD. I would like to ask Karsten Wittke to start our discussion. But first, let me introduce him. He was born in Wuppertal, the city which is also important for me, very close to my heart. Since 2000, he's been living in Barut am Markt in Brandenburg. He studied in HDK, now it's the University of Fine Arts in Berlin. He studied painting and interdisciplinary art as well as art projects, focusing on rural areas and transformation. He developed a concept for Barut am Markt, creating the Baruter Bank, largely funded through the Stiftung Bosch, the Bosch Foundation. He was also part of SPT as the city councillor, which means he was active politically. Since 2018, he's been coordinating municipal affairs in Barut am Markt in Brandenburg. He's been collaborating on implementation of the 2030 agenda on the municipal level. The 17 goals that were set up, you can see them on the flag here, the Sustainable Development Goals. Since 2019, Karsten has been collaborating with Mongolia. Let me say it in English. He wrote, the political postulate is to introduce sustainable development as one of the municipal obligations. Welcome. It's a beautiful morning. I hope you had a good night's sleep. I would like to welcome you to our morning discussion. In this panel discussion, we'll be focusing on the sustainable development and art. Thank you, Joanna, for this introduction. I'm really happy that we can discuss this idea and that I'll be able to talk about it with Aleksandra, Ania, and Claudia. We exchanged some ideas about this panel, about our discussion. I think because of that we'll have a coherent discussion with interwoven voices focusing on sustainable development and art. We'll be talking about new avenues and the whole agenda. And in preparation for this conference, we actually asked ourselves some personal questions. As Joanna presented when talking about my biography, you know that I work in Mark. It's a small locality within an urban area, having its own municipal administration. And the ways in which we can integrate art with sustainable development is exactly what I would like to discuss. I would also like to discuss what you can see here on the flag. Unfortunately, it's all in German, the 17 goals, sustainable development goals. Found that local conversations and discussions at the local level, which are the basis of my activities and what I do, they have been hindered by the fact that we could no longer meet face to face. So for me, it was worrying, and also I took it rather personally, the fact that communication systems in the world are undergoing some radical change, art being marginalized. People were more interested in medicine than in art. Nobody applauded art anymore. And then perhaps we started considering what art can bring us in these new times. Yesterday we talked about healing, about new contexts. I think during the pandemics these conversations were completely unheard. So my personal question for the topics that we discuss, the question that I had to ask was that perhaps art is no longer useful, or is incapable of offering anything to this civic society. It's not able to explain why and how it is actually an important part of our everyday life. The question that was asked really struck a very personal chord in me, and I asked this question with my co-panelists. We exercise and are active in different kinds of professions, now contributing to one discussion. I'm very subjective in this discussion, but I'm trying to act objectively in my work, administrative work. You might ask how come an artist ended up in an administration and and especially in a place focusing on sustainable development. Am I qualified to do this kind of work? Can I learn? Apart from my background, academic background, I've also had experience in leading our artistic projects together with Anya, who lives in Baruth. We created the sustainable development related project. Since 2004, we've been asking ourselves a question constantly: how can artistic projects become independent and self-funding? We have set up a winery in Baruth, and we noticed that it actually worked. We were selling wine in order to fund art. So we funded art using a product that is not art in itself. when we talked with the Bosch Foundation about the idea of our bank, we also made it clear that it's not something that's to be funded, it's something that will be collaborating with another bank. And we actually found other banks to enter into this collaboration. So we actually checked that art can operate within other contexts, and this kind of work was actually one of the advantages that was taken into account when I was offered this job. On the go, I learned other kinds of work apart from the artistic work. So this actually qualified me for the tasks. That's why I can now tell you about these 17 Sustainable Development Goals. We had to structure this work in line with the funding application. We do have some indicators that need to be satisfied, and we need to report on the implementation of our goals. Just like in other contexts of support, we had to undergo evaluation, assessing to what extent art was then supporting sustainable development, and if art could actually be qualified to become a separate area where you could develop your activities. I'm not sure whether you are familiar with these goals. The goals have been developed for the whole world as part of the 2030 agenda. They have been signed, but they are not set in stone. There are more guidelines than obligatory rules. The administrative units are supposed to integrate them in their activities and these goals are to be perceived as tasks to be implemented jointly, collaboratively on the global scale. The more answers we provide, the more questions we generate. So it's 2021 now, there are 9 years left until 2030, and now we're asking ourselves perhaps how are we to cope with the process that is well underway, that we've been warned about for a long time by the scientists. I mean the climate change and climate collapse, how to implement these sustainable development goals. The younger generations, as Fridays for Futures showed, are well aware about this. They went to the streets. They took to the streets with very specific demands. We need to see how our governments respond, whether they're going to give some leverage to these actions, to give them more strength and scope. You can learn about these sustainable goals on the internet. They are very well described. I would like to focus on one specific aspect which is fascinating for me. I work as part of the local government, the municipal administration, which has very clear structures and which works in an orderly way. And I noticed an incredible range of similarities between art and sustainable development from the point of view of administration. They are both vital for our survival, but they are defined as voluntary actions. At least that's how the public administration defines them. So I'll give you a crash course in administrative thinking. We have 8,000 territorial units since the Prussian time in 19th century. There is one thing that they have in common, and that differentiated them from the centralized state. And this was actually put in place in order to prevent the center in Berlin from taking control. These administrative units, municipalities, are independent as a principle. Municipalities in Germany cannot be proscribed the ways in which they are to spend their money. They can be given obligatory tasks such as maintaining roads, city infrastructure, all those basic vital functions. The city budget, which needs to be approved every year by the city councillor, by the district councillor, etc. It's them who decide how these tasks are funded. So if a municipality or another administrative unit can fulfill their tasks, these obligatory, compulsory, basic tasks they have been assigned, they can actually reassign the rest of their funds to other voluntary, so to speak, or non-compulsory activities. If they have the money to do it. If they don't have to deal with it at all. It's not compulsory. So now I feel compelled to tell you on behalf of the mayors and other representatives of of local administration that this is actually a great weakness, which involves the awareness and self-awareness of the councillors and other municipal authorities, because people they need to know why it's worthwhile to fund art and sustainable development. They need to know why it's useful. If the society demands that specific points are being implemented, specific points related to sustainable development and art, so if the public demands it, then the municipality has to assign funds. And then these tasks become less voluntary and more compulsory, because that's the will of the residents, of inhabitants. But actually, in order to provide a basic foundation to implement these tasks, we need something that will fit in all these quite rigid structures. It might happen that the society demands something, but it is never implemented because of the rigid structures that would where it would get stuck, and then this drive to change will evaporate. Things that we discussed yesterday will also contribute to our discussion today. So everything that we talk about requires funds, money. So we need to convince investors, especially local authorities, that they should actually invest in these areas. So that's about the structural part. The next slide. What do I need to do? All right, press the button, the magic technology. All right. So with this next slide, I would like to wrap up my discussion of the administrative part of the question. So this is perhaps not this is me trying to present an example of work which I thought is an excellent example of the new path or an option. to start and initiate a process of new thinking. The document, I don't remember which one it was. Yes, it was Pierre Hook. Sorry, apologies, I don't know how to pronounce this name. Sorry for not being perfectly prepared. Yes, at the Documenta Festival 15, this famous work, which inspired me, and then I kept looking for it. I couldn't find it for a long time. And I remembered the dog that was there. And that's the German word for the wagons for loose goods transportation. It was painted pink, and here in this project it was used to transport the recycled mass made of waste. And that was an example of a contribution to our thinking how art can be included in environmental cycles. Of course, this is a metaphor for many things, but we can also think about it from the perspective of how it can affect us. Because then in this project we had to do more with gardening, there were bees, etc. More gardening than art, but actually it provided me with this opportunity to rethink a lot of things. Yesterday we mentioned the shamanic concepts. Of course, it's always very difficult because every time I travel to Mongolia, I see that shamanism is treated very seriously there. It's practiced as religion, so it's a practice. So what we have shifts towards spiritual or religious area. We see the power that lies in there, the strength it can give to art within the societies. And that also perhaps answers in part the question about sustainable development, how we evaluate the whole situation. Things that happen around us, that emerge within the reality that is around us, that is shaped there. We are just actors, actants. Perhaps we can communicate with them, they can communicate with us. And I perceive myself not as an active creator now, but as an aware observer of this. I've been given the signal that my time is running up. All right, so let me present another slide and then I'll wrap up. So once again, this is an example of practical work I've been doing here. Part of the collaboration with Mongolia. We have the Mongolian team collaborating with us. The Murun, which is the Sustainable Development Citizen Forum, we created together this space for conversations. We described how we collaborated with the public administration, local administration. We talked about the basic conditions of survival, our work was done mostly online through video conferencing, and I have to say that this actually worked pretty well. So it turned out that within our structures we can also implement activities that strengthen civic participation, democratic participation. If we can incorporate art into it, I think we can make even further steps. I hope that I could provide some impulses. I'm very looking forward to the next presentations and to this creative part that will the work in groups. Thank you very much, Kirsten.
So, thank you very much, Kirsten. So here's the idea of this project. Please, how many women there are in this panel session, women that have been changing the world for the future? So it was Kirsten's idea. I want to highlight it once again. You can see also how from a little community one can enter into a global world and discuss in an incredible way about the sense of responsibility for the future and world. So I'd like to welcome our next speaker, Ania Oswald, who is a researcher dealing with art and culture and the ways the world is perceived and constructed. She focuses on complex transformative patterns. She researches acts, ways of behavior that change the way of thinking. Currently, she's been focused on transformative processes in regional and urban development with multifunctional structures as well. So, Anya, the floor is yours. Thank you, Jana. Thank you. I think there should be many more people in the audience. The advantage of this situation is that I was invited here that we are a small group, is that we can coordinate in a fantastic way. However, a larger participation would be appreciated. So we decided to have a look at art, at sustainable growth. So I find both these terms a bit difficult, not because of what is hiding, because of behind them, this environmental awareness and art, that's understandable, but it's more about labels that are put upon them. So we'll discuss about different arts. There is no one art, such as there is no one society or one administrative organization unit. So we always need to have a look at what is included in this one term. So I'd like to give you one takeaway thought for this way we want to follow. When we think about art, we as a society in a given situation, we need to think about certain defined patterns and labels that we have when we think about art. When we think about art, we think about different pieces of art that are exhibited in different places, biennales, they win different awards. And that's a very well-known stereotype. That's what I know. That's what I hear from my students, from people that I've been guiding around the city, the stereotype that, well, artists, they earn a lot. But this may be just 1% of artists, the 1% that is also socially visible in the social reception. This is art that enjoys attention, and that decides also about how art as a whole is perceived. So this element, strictly related to the economic system we have been operating, it's almost 200 years old. And we got into this very fast revolving dynamics. It makes us almost dizzy. So this development, this pressure to go faster, quicker, sooner, this logic that is followed by our economy and our art, the whole avant-garde is based on that. So one direction, one genre of art decides about a brand, a style, and it imposes it, and later on it's exceeded by other artistic genres. Until now, we still have some artists who think, well, do and think whatever you want, and that's how they want to find their place in the market, and they try to create their own label, their own brand that is even more original than before. We know that artworks can be sometimes very expensive. We know how high prices at auctions can go. And we need to pay attention to that. Carsten mentioned that, and I'm very grateful to that. We need to think how we define art we are discussing here. Because for quite a long time, and yesterday, we've been discussing and we've, so to say, agreed that art has a certain social dimension. It is socially responsible. It has a message and content. What is implied by that, it doesn't really work, because art has been marginalized, and it will be marginalized. This is why artists depend so much on temporary structural support, so different funds. And if art cannot be present in its own role, citizens tend to think, well, it's unimportant. Several citizens don't think about art at all. They are not aware about what that is. So I find it's great that there are so many women among us. But once we emphasize that if we are in a feminized group here, we are marginalized once again. So this is a topic that I've been dealing with and that I've been coping to. The situation is very complex, and it refers to everything that makes us be ourselves. What keeps us alive on the one hand, but then it may make us crash with the logic. So this logic of continuous linear growth, every day we need to go further and further, be better and better. This madness about optimizing everything, just to get through this way of thinking and instead move from this linear thinking into circular idea and circular economy is a great task. We may think that's an equally mad and equally megalomaniac, we could say, but we saw yesterday that it could work in art, that there are different ways of thinking. And I think that the examples that we saw yesterday, Marek's examples in Poznań were excellent. Works of Paweł Altheimer's, whose work I've been observing for 15 years. I still have this poor souvenir from 15 years ago. So it's about twisting, tilting our perspective to have a mad perspective. What I have behind my head, my back on the slide is it is a provocation. It was placed in Munich on a building several years ago. If the world would have been a bank, you would have saved it a long time ago. That's the slogan, like this. Imagine a banner like this, 5-6 meters wide, broad, on a hyper-real estate, a bank that was saved with several million or billion of dollars from collapse. And Greenpeace found a fantastic way to express that in one sentence. to express this contradiction and the gap between art and economy. When I went to the Biennale in Venice, this is what I missed when I was snacking and watching art and sailing in gondola. This is what I lacked during this Biennale, because I also wanted to see this kind of active art. So the question is, who is able to understand this kind of art and this kind of a poster? I think that we need more activism also in our understanding of art, some more anarchy and political awareness. I understand that in this group I'm just saying some obvious things. So I know that, just as Carton said, that we need to shift boundaries in local administration bodies. I really like Ola's approach. He's going to present it in a moment. Now I'd like to present one example of a project, one exemplary project, because I believe in regional attachment. You definitely need to know the things that you talk about. This is Doc Lavender and his wife Helen. Lavender is an artist from Stuttgart. He became famous as a performative artist. He gained his fame like that. Maybe you remember him, how in Peking he sneaked among the soldiers of the terracotta soldiers. He got dressed, he disguised as a soldier, and there was a great scandal out of that. He had to be diplomatically taken out of the prison in Lockenbad in northern Brandenburg. There is a powerhouse from 1936. This is a lignite power plant producing power plant. Brandenburg itself is a post-industrial textile city. It has lots of Bauhaus architecture, so it was very self-conscious and proud city, but after 1990 it has experienced a collapse. So Pablo Wendel, he bought this powerhouse and he created electrics project. So you can see a part of a project that he's carrying out. So Performance Electrics looks very similar to Global General Electric, so this connotation is very clear, and he runs different projects with his wife there. What they have been doing there, this is not the turbine hall in the power plant. This is an old swimming pool in the same city. So they had a happening there that previously was awarded at the Biennale, and then they decided to perform it also in their town. I think it's a great idea to move this popular and famous art to bring it back to the region. And they were really successful also in bringing this old coal power plants to life. They were able to install there some old wooden power plants, pellet-based power plants. So they take some wood chips, some production side effects, and they produce energy in old converted diesel generators. Then they sell it in different artistic actions to inhabitants and investors. there was a Lipstick-Aktionen, you may remember that. You can become a shareholder in a performers. So this is how it works also in this area. So all projects are to be financed with this artistically produced energy from wood. And this is also how it works in our vineyards that we've been working on. The last year was very poor, but fortunately this year we were able to crop 4 times as much as we usually do. So I hope we are going to be able to earn something for our art. You can see what else they were able to do, Pablo and his wife. They produced a community kitchen where they reuse the food that has been past its expiry date, and whatever cannot be eaten anymore, it's also burned in the power place. They also built the petrol service in a camouflage to charge electric cars. So these are also very regular artistic exhibitions that the two carries out. So they are simultaneously within and outside the traditional art system. So there are more examples like this, of course. So Hen Fisher is from the US. He declares that he is a part of the artistic world. He was also described in New York Times. So they are involved in this game, and they have some international scholarship participants. So there is also a scholarship that was opened in 1920, just before the 2020, just before the pandemics. But they are diverting from the well-checked, proven artistic paths as well to new ways. I think this is a good preliminary introduction to what I'm going to say. So what they do, they are trying to transform the structures that are already there. So these are some extracts from their 3 principal theses. Initially, I thought that the lecture is going to be in English. That's why I prepared my slides in English, but I think it's not that complicated for you to be able to translate it in a different way back to Germany or to German or to Polish. So playing with the impossible, the first rule, is an assumption which makes us think what we want to do out of things that perhaps still do not exist. What else we can give to the world? Progressive deceleration, yet another important point. So quitting this thought of faster, quicker, further, and instead think where we can save some resources and where we can reuse them and reproduce them. So collaboration, not competition, the third point. So how we can find a common ground, local partners to organize different exhibitions, to provide different services, and how we can get together and create a local cooperative. So that was my input into our discussion. For me, it's very important that we should stay aware about what kind of art we discuss, what art means for us, in a very emphatic and empathic way. We should focus on what art production means for us, how we work as art producers. How we perceive art when we experience it at exhibitions, or when we see a poster by a guerrilla group or Friends for Future. Or I find that Extinction Rebellion, it's an excellent pan as well. So I'm definitely on the activist side of arts.
Ania Oswald, bardzo serdecznie.
Ania Oswald, very thank you very much for presenting the exceptional quality of art and going back to the basic of creating a vision and presenting solutions for the future, which are being practiced in those fascinating ways, like in Ljubljana, for example, the alternative economic system connected with art, or like you do with Karsten, having your own winery and vineyard, promoting artistic approaches full of authenticity, going back to the origin of art, which in contemporary art connected with capitalism and market is missing. The vision for the future, that is missing. I would like to ask Alexandra Jach to take the floor now. She's the curator, manager, facilitator, coach. She graduated from art history in Krakow in Jagiellonian University, and then she started her now 10-year-long collaboration with the Avant-Garde Art Museum in Łódź. In 2019, I think you stopped your work there, and you set up a group, Culture for Climate. You had 8 other participants. That's how you started the new stage of your journey. But it's not entirely new. Ola has been the curator and organizer of many exhibitions, and you might have seen an exhibition she curated in Hamburger Hauptbahnhof. What was the title? I don't remember the exact title, but it was talking with birds, fish, bulls, and lions, I think. Yes, the title was quite long. I don't remember it exactly. All right, thank you, and let's start the presentation. All right, I'm going to have my own timekeeping. As we've learned, time is a value that we, people working in art, we do know what's the value of time, and we work with it. Today I would like to tell you about Culture for Climate. It's a collective that was set up in the pandemic year 2020 by, like Joanna said, by 9 women. Me and 8 other women. Here you have the names. So what are the roots of this idea? We've all been involved in some kind of activities within the culture area. So we have educators, curators, experienced managers, or heads of NGOs who have implemented many projects focusing on environmental issues. And at some point, we all face the question, what's next? Are we going to continue implementing these pretty advanced, interesting projects together with our partners, institutional partners as well? But very often, when the project comes to a close, the community dissipates, and the work on relevant solutions also comes to a halt. So that's what we started to perceive as the lost potential, and hence the idea to come together and work as a collective. Our first step, an idea, was to create a web page, a culture for climate. .pl. The website is both in Polish and in English, and there on this web page you can find recommendations for greening institutions and organizations. Very simple solutions that can be applied immediately, related to educating people working in administration institutions, raising awareness, changing behaviors without any cost involved. There are also suggestions that require some kind of funding and more complex recommendations related to systemic issues requiring either funding or effort and work on rethinking the way in which the given institution operates, and we are very keen to have as many of such recommendations on our webpage. Greening recommendations that can actually be implemented on the go immediately, that depend only and solely on the goodwill of people working in such institutions. I think that you in this room certainly know that ideas related to sustainable development, we can call it using different names, green transformation, for example, that they've been implemented within businesses or at large scale. So for us it was important to also find such points that differentiate us from business thinking. Business thinking, which is in itself quite inspiring as well, and quite advanced. But since in Poland many institutions that create and facilitate, foster culture, they are public institutions, or they are non-profit organizations. We wanted to focus on activities within the public or non-profit spheres. In our view, what can be done by such institutions? First of all, institutions such as museums have a long life, so they can actually afford and creating communities surrounding them for a long time, and providing the opportunity to implement complex projects requiring many steps. They can introduce environmentally friendly change, they can shape behaviors, they can foster collaboration between themselves and local communities, creating also collaboration going beyond the local community. They can also experiment with different solutions that wouldn't be attractive for businesses because they would not generate much profit. And this is interesting because that's what I've been hearing from many people I work with in businesses as well, who focus on sustainable development, and they've been telling me that they are quite jealous about that. The solutions that they implement are always budget-oriented, and that we can afford creating green prototypes of processes and products and services on a smaller scale, but with a much larger space for experimenting. When we thought about how to approach the topic of green institutions, we decided to define and identify specific areas we wanted to work on together with institutions, and that's what we actually started to do, creating and organizing workshops about green institutions. We teach people how they can, within their own institutions, implement such projects. So we identified areas which could be found in more or less every institution dealing with culture and all smaller organizations. So we have topics such as building or caring for the surrounding, caring for nature, everyday practices, financial issues, partnerships. You can see many different areas coming from different orders, and we were very keen to include different orders as well. Because this is also something that differentiates us from many other solutions in the so-called green business. The social issues for us are as important as environmental issues, which means that sensible management of resources, material resources, for example, not wasting food and electricity, water, is as important as good relationships at work, well-being of workers and employees, good relationships and collaboration with neighbors. What I mean by that is good, effective, empathic, and with the potential to grow. Collaboration with other institutions, organizations, raising awareness about environmental issues. We believe that institutions of culture can get involved in these areas and address these topics. Topics such as organization of work, involving working on the structure of organization, introducing flat hierarchies and working out new, novel ways of collaborating. Here at this Congress we've been talking a lot about collaboration. I'm really impressed by the projects that you tell us about, how they roll because of human energy that feeds them, which is free. By which I mean that people who are involved, they actually generate the modes of doing, and it's actually possible if you work and if you act with freedom, and that's what might not be so possible in institutions of culture which work according to a specific pattern, and which have been working like this for many years. In many institutions of culture, the structure has been there for many years, and it's not up to date with the ways in which people work in other places, in businesses, in art, where we are involved in informal groups and using human potential of creating this space of autonomy and agency. Summing up, when we talk to other people about our greening initiatives, greening actions, we often come across doubts and questions. People say, well, it looks so simple, but for sure it's not so simple. And here you can see examples of some typical dilemmas or A versus B questions. For example, environmental thinking is expensive. That's an assumption that people often make. perhaps we haven't calculated it so thoroughly, but we just assume that environmental actions are expensive, or knowledge. The assumption that we need complex knowledge and spend a lot of time to study a given topic, and only then we can implement some practices. This is also something that blocks and hinders introduction of even small changes. Or the thing that is very important for us, because we work with institutions, the relationship between individual involvement, what I can do as an employee, as a single individual employee, versus what the system could do, what I can expect from the system. And who should be acting here? So this is also the area that we often have to address. Our response is that these poles actually support each other, individual action and the pressure on the system within which we operate. They actually support each other, are mutually interdependent. I would like to finish with that, to perhaps leave some space for discussion and our joint collaborative work. Thank you very much for inviting me. And that will be it. Thank you.
A German Jewish American sociologist, Mr. Wallenstein, he said that every day, everywhere in the world, there is a struggle between the good and the evil, and by the end of the day we don't know what will prevail and win. I think that what Alexander presented to us is an unusual suggestion of a grassroots revolution in Poland. Probably this face has a female face. I apologize to men who are present here, but so far that's apparently the case. So the 9 people who can run a very pioneering project, which is not founded, as it sometimes happens in Germany, by a foundation at a federal level. There is an idea to create 19 institutions that would be dealing with the coal world and the way of funding them. This project has already been launched, if I remember well. No, this is a totally grassroots initiative of 9 responsible, courageous girls who know that things happen not only now, but they also have repercussions and consequences for the future. Coming back to the person who planned this discussion and who originated this idea, what Constant once told me not a long time ago made me terrified. Brandenburg is now a place that is health, a lung, heart and the stomach for Berlin, not only for Berlin. If we continue to work like that in this beautiful area region, in 30 years from now, we'll be in a steppe, in a desert, because this land has an incredible nature, many meadows, lakes, and in 30 years from now, it may be not there. So what Ola does in Poland, it is also a totally pioneering grassroots idea for me. It's very important, and I would like to thank you very much for that. Now I'd like to invite the last person to take the floor in this discussion today, Dr. Claudia Bittner, who is an art historian and an independent curator in Munich. She specializes in public art. She creates and supervises projects in the public space, among others Sculpture Collective in Münster in 1997 and Dream City in Munich in 1990. From 1999 to 2003, she headed the Kunstwerk Dream, a model project of arts in the public space in Munich. She was a lecturer of history and art on the Technische Universität in Berlin and Munich. and at University of Art in Linz as well. So she counsels to communities in artistic programs. She is also in different juries, and she is also responsible for Kunstanbau for German Federal Ministry of Transport and Internal Affairs and Building and Structures. So the floor is yours, Claudia. Warm welcome to everyone. Good morning. So, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Carsten, for inviting me to your female group. When we've been asking the question if arts can at all be sustainable and what kind of arts are we discussing, when I was confronted with this question by citizens and politicians when I was working in urban space, people started asking me this question related to fixed permanent artworks which wouldn't be harmful to the environment in a long time, because I always worked with the ephemeric temporary works. So I asked, well, what do you think should be permanent and sustainable in this piece of art? So this piece of art also had to be always well visible beforehand. I've never worried about things like that in the context of art. Nobody would even ask me, especially in the 1990s. In the 1990s, art moved very much towards the ephemerical. We did something and we assumed that it wouldn't change. But now this postulate has been formulated to create something that would stay with us, which would also have some social relevance. So I trust that arts can do that art can change our everyday life and our perception as well, and our outlook on different matters. It can also change our environment, our surrounding, and our perception of different things. And that's the reason why I was able to dwell for the area of art in public arts. Art that I was supposed to create was supposed to be relevant to the situation and resistant. It was to persevere in space. It was supposed to fit into the area, the place itself, and be very well connected with the topic and the place it was to be situated. That was the first criterion. And the second criterion was that this art was to add something to the narrative, to the identification of this place. It was also supposed to give access to real or fictitious opportunities, possibilities, and history of this place. It was to be actively absorbed in the place it was situated in. So all of you who are here and who deal with art on everyday basis, you have your own approach to art, including temporary objects of art created in cooperation with neighbors, communities, and friends. In temporary projects, these questions have already been asked. And indeed, cooperation with people has been initiated. There were new structures for cooperating, acting, and communicating have been already founded. conditions created by politicians, urban space planning, funding, etc. are there, because this is what decides about co-creating reality. Over the recent years, I've been dealing with integration and implementation of arts, artistic long-term activities in long-term shaping of areas that we inhabit. Among others, there's a question: what art object can be created to make it possible to be integrated in this urban tissue? What is important for us to present our art? There are two things. I'll present to you two examples here. There are some artworks that we confront. Perhaps these are not the best work arts, but they are good examples how efficient they can be. So the first, it's a cooperation of a female artist in Vienna, a part of a city, Britta Thier. So she called it Favorites, referring to her favorite things. And that's the top title she gave. She publicized it through social media, Facebook, and especially Instagram. She decided to present her favorite places. A key thing for everyone. Very important in internet communication, showing what we know. This is how we can represent ourselves. So she decided to meet all the people involved from her collection of favorites, her favorites, and she created a video relating to the history of her favorite places. Some very typical, beautiful stories, beautiful and atypical, not typical stories. So she created it in this convention of contemporary series such as Friends. Next, the videos, the series was collected into season 1 of the series, and then it was played precisely in the places that they were referring to. Here you can see an actress presenting one of her favorite places, so the protagonists have become public people, media people. They presented themselves on the Instagram. They also got involved in this recognizable narration about the place through cooperation, collaboration in social media in an artistic way. So the next example, there was a cooperation of Rosemary Trockler, an artist with a landscape architect, Topotec One, a Konstantinbau program in Munich, which was about public program of supporting art in construction. So they carried out a very difficult project to develop a difficult public space, a big public space, on the roof, a cover, as they called it, over 6 railway tracks. So a very thin layer, a structure. It was not possible to plant any trees on it because it was so thick. Of course, this competition included some very traditional ideas, but the authorities decided to open this project not only to professional gardeners and architects, but also to artists who could get into cooperation with architects, but they were to be responsible for managing that. There was also an artist who wanted to create a huge mosaic there. You can do that as well. you can plant a small mosaic on this huge space. However, the piece by Mary Trockle won. She created a beautiful narrative for this place. This is what you need to imagine, in fact. So she wanted to create this landscape that was to reach from mountains up to the sea. So there was artificial and real grass that was arranged in stripes there. Then there were also some hurdles to jump over them. That was to symbolize cattle on mountain meadows that can also be used as sport equipment. There were some benches installed there as well. Some trampolines, different pieces of equipment, decorative architecture. And there were also some special attraction places. You could press a button to have a simulation of a sea climate by generating a salty mist when you press the button. And this postulate and ambition to create a playing ground for both children and adults was greatly fulfilled. So over 10-11 years it's been working very well because people enjoy being there at different times of day, and they use this space for different meetings. So both these projects show how different responses there can be for this postulate of sustainable growth and durability of projects. So it was successful in creating this awareness and the space that is inhabited by many people, and created the sense of identity for the place. It also shows what creative heads can create. So a very broad understanding and scope of how art can be presented for our purposes. This is what we notice perhaps only during pandemics, that different authors, and in this approach from artists, this is what we miss. This is like the phantom pain that we have after parts of the body that went missing suddenly. So that was my contribution to this discussion. Claudia, thank you very much for pointing out to some very important situations when cities are more and more gentrified and there is very little public space. Every free piece of land is sold to someone unknown, and suddenly in this place is offered to artists for them to enter and to recreate a moment of freedom for people, and the space to meet for different social groups to meet. So the two projects that you presented are an unusual example of how urban tissue doesn't live without people in there. And first of all, about communication that to a large extent can be created by artists in a totally different way, by asking different questions. For small agora. So thank you very much for your input.
I suggest that we follow our tradition from yesterday, which means let's take a short break now, 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll start working around 3 tables. I will ask Monika Stefańska to provide a short summary, and I would like to ask Karsten to tell us about these 3 tables within which we'll work for the next 40-50 minutes. But let's first have a break, short break.